Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to our second day and last day for the conference. Before I introduce I would like to remind you that today we'll have in the last session at 5 o'clock, the closing session. We will give the certificate of attendance in person. If you are not here, I'm afraid you cannot send it by any other means. And there are 3 awards, one for the best paper in the main sessions, and one for the best paper in the research forum, and one for the best presenter in all sessions. We will also announce something for the next events. This session here, then the next session will be parallel sessions, one in this room and the other one in the building salon. Now for our session, I'm very pleased today to introduce Professor Mike Sheets, who will deliver the third plenary session in the conference. Mike is a chair in accounting at Michigan State University. He has published a number of articles in the mainstream accounting journals, Program Journal of Accounting Research, and the Accounting Review. Mike is currently editor of the Accounting Organization and Society, director of the IME Foundation, and a member of the research board of CIME-CIMA. Today, Mike will talk about what do we know about management accounting from published research.
Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I feel very honored. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be here. I'd also like to thank Cairo University and the conference organizers for taking the initiative to organize the conference and all the work that it entails. I've had the opportunity over many years to organize a lot of conferences. I know it's just a lot of work behind the scenes, and we all appreciate it. What I wanted to do is talk about what do we know about management accounting from published research. There is a great diversity of research in management accounting, and it extends beyond my scope of expertise, and therefore I'm going to focus on what in traditional terms might be called positivistic research. And an operational definition to get some scope on that would be general causal explanations of a management accounting practice that are common to many instances of it and validated by quantitative tests of theory-based hypotheses. Essentially, all of this research is either archival, taking, for example, records from a company and statistically analyzing it, or laboratory experiments, or very few field experiments, and surveys. My colleague Joan Luft and I wrote a paper that was published in AOS recently that provides an analysis or overview of this type of research in all of accounting. I think the main takeaway from that paper is that while positivist research is considered to be objective, reliable, independent, these sorts of things, the theme of our article was how it's just full of subjectivity. Lots of judgments made by researchers. For convenience, I'm just going to call this kind of research going forward in my presentation management accounting research. This kind of research is reviewed in the 3 volumes of the Handbook of Management Accounting Research. It was published a few years ago. My presentation is organized by 3 questions. What do we know about management accounting from published research? Why don't we know more about management accounting from published research? And finally, how can we increase our knowledge about management accounting from published research? So my first question here is, what do we know about management accounting from published research? I'm going to rephrase that a little bit. Recently, the Journal of Management Accounting Research had its 25th year anniversary, and there was a panel at a conference, and I was on it, and we were asked 3 questions. The first question was literally, in what topics do we have established management accounting knowledge? I subsequently wrote that into an article that appeared in JMON. I thought it was a very good question. The one word really caught my attention and really made me think a lot about knowledge, and that was the word established. So I went to the dictionary, and dictionaries define established as to cause something to be widely known and accepted, to put beyond doubt. So that's a very high hurdle in terms of what constitutes knowledge about management accounting. But that's the hurdle that I took because that was the way the question was framed to me. So my belief is that management accounting research is not likely to be established until it survived the critical challenges of subsequent related research. So my operational definition here of established management accounting knowledge would be causal explanations of management accounting practice that are supported by theory-consistent evidence from multiple studies published before the year 2000. So how did I go about identifying what studies might generate established knowledge given this definition? Lufton Shields, we had the opportunity to write about a 150-page journal article a few years ago that reviewed and analyzed large portions of the management accounting literature. So I'm going to use that as a general database, and some of the studies that are in those papers will constitute established knowledge. My sense is that the established knowledge we have, knowledge that everybody would agree to, and has been supported by multiple studies, is at a very big picture level. For example, when we have more uncertainty, there's more demand for management accounting. There's no uncertainty, everybody knows everything, so why do we need management accounting information? But the presence of uncertainty creates opportunities for management accounting to reduce uncertainty. Related asymmetric information, differences between knowledge, information, a high level of the firm and a low level of the firm, or across various parts of the firm, marketing, engineering, production, etc. So in this view, accounting is used to reduce or equalize, reduce uncertainty or equalize knowledge within the firm. There's also a lot of agreement that a lot of management accounting practices influence managerial and organizational performance. So with sticking at this very big picture level, without getting into lots of details, we'll get into details later. The details where things get messy. But I want to stay at this very high level altitude right now. I'm going to give a quick review of what would be considered established knowledge in management accounting, which in the literature would include management control systems and cost accounting. So if we look at management control systems, there's a really excellent review, a couple review articles by Rob Hall. In general, this literature controls get classified into 2 types. There's mechanistic and there's organic controls. Mechanistic would be characterized by centralized organizations, hierarchy, formal rules and procedures, budgets, and accounting information used for performance evaluation and compensation. In contrast, we have organic controls, which would be characterized by decentralized organizations. Instead of a vertical flow of information, there's more a horizontal flow of information and decisions. We rely much more on social and personal controls and a lot of participation in the organization. So the research to date, and has been since about 1970, quite a bit of research in this area, focuses on either design of these control systems or the importance of them to the success of the organization, or how they're used in organizations. And typically a study has one or very few controls. And one theme of this literature is that the design, importance, or use of these controls depends on the context of the control. So important context variables here would be environmental uncertainty that's outside the firm, and organizational characteristics like its competitive strategy, the size of the firm, the organizational structure, the kind of technology, and uncertainty within the firm, task uncertainty. And there are two basic notions here in this literature. One is that the context influences the management control that's present. For example, if we have a lot of uncertainty, then it means we need to have an organization design and controls design that will allow us to process a lot of uncertainty to reduce the uncertainty. So in that case, when we have a lot of uncertainty, we would expect to find organic controls. So that would be an example of selection fit. Oops. We also have interaction fit, and this is concerned with when there's not a good fit. For example, there's a lot of uncertainty in the environment, but for whatever reason, the organization has mechanistic controls. So that the control doesn't fit the environment, therefore we're going to have lower performance. Second area of research is in management accounting, and the bulk of this research would be grouped into three areas. One, dealing with budgets and budgeting as a process of developing and revising budgets, concerned with how we link budgets to compensation, how difficult are budget targets, and who's involved in budgeting. Superiors only, or subordinates and superiors, or whoever. There's a nice review paper in this area if you're interested in that. The second big area is performance contingent compensation. It's concerned with how annual bonuses are based on measured performance, so the higher your profit, the bigger your bonus, or the difference between measured performance and some budget goal. So the more you exceed the budget, the higher your profit is relative to the budgeted profit, the bigger the bonus you get. Or increasingly, we compare your profits to someone else's profits. The higher your profits are to someone else's, the bigger your bonus. A lot of research on performance measures. Financial measures traditionally are this topic. Increasingly today it's on non-financial measures and also on how performance measures are adjusted for the effects of uncontrollables. There's a lot of evidence that indicates the more we have of these kinds of practices, the higher performance. There are exceptions, but in general, there's a positive relation. The more we have budgeting, the more we have budget-based compensation, the more we have performance measures, the higher performance is in the organization. The last area is cost accounting. This is a newer area of research, and it breaks down into two groups of studies. One is archival research that provides evidence on whether three assumptions of activity-based costing are empirically valid. The first assumption about non-volume drivers is widely supported. The second two assumptions, though, there are quite a few studies that show that empirically the costs violate these assumptions. The implication is that maybe ABC doesn't fit that well with how costs are actually generated or caused in organizations. Banker and Johnson provide a really good review of this kind of research. This is all economics and statistics. The second area of research is on how the environment and the organizational context influences whether organizations implement or use activity-based costing, and how much satisfaction or success they have with it. And it's been found that there are a lot of context factors. There's a list of them here: competition, strategy, uncertainty, performance measurement, product diversity, etc., that influence whether firms decide to implement ABC and what kind of success, level of success they have with it. So there's a couple review articles for this literature also. So that would be a quick overview of research that's occurred in the past, that in general there's been a lot of research and some consensus that this is the way things are established. What I'd like to do is talk for a few minutes about current research that's going on since the year 2000 up to today, the hot stuff today, which is summarized in this paper that I published recently. And there are 5 what I call themes. One is decision influencing role of management accounting. This is kind of a historical theme that is carried on into today. It's concerned with how the way management accounting measures and monitors and evaluates and rewards people, and how that affects agency costs related to adverse selection and moral hazard. Sprinkle and Williamson provide a really nice review article there. The new topic in this area is subjective performance evaluation. And Jasmine Bowl provides a pretty good review article there. A newer topic area that probably started around the year 2000 is inter-organizational context of management accounting. Management accounting in supply chain, management accounting in joint ventures, strategic alliances. So it's been looked at how things like ABC, open book accounting, target costing, total cost of ownership, value chain analysis affect things like how you select partners in a joint venture. How do you write a contract with your partner to identify the rights and responsibilities of the people involved in the supply chain network or whatever it happens to be? How do we control behavior, the rules and regulations? How do we do cost accounting for costs that are generated across multiple organizations? And how do we make or buy decisions in these contexts? There's 3 really good review articles recently in this area. The third area, which I've been involved with, is behavioral economics. There's probably more activity going on here than any of the others. And the idea is that we had an economic model, and while it was very powerful, it was very incomplete. And what we're trying to do here is bring in additional variables to enrich the basic model. So we're integrating neoclassical economics and psychology theories. And what we're concerned with here is, how does management accounting, for example, budgeting or the way we measure performance, how does that affect how individuals trade off utility for monetary payoffs versus utility for non-monetary payoffs? And these studies generally find that people are willing to give up money so they can get other things out of life. They value social psychological things like fairness, honesty, reciprocity, trust. They will give up money to get gain on those things. They will also give up money to simplify the situation because of limited cognitive ability, memory, and cognitive effort. And finally, people are very emotional, they have moods, they have affect, and they will use management accounting to increase their emotional satisfaction, for example, even if that means giving up money. So people value more than money is what it comes down to. And management accounting will influence how they value these non-monetary items. A fourth area of research today relates to competitive strategies, and it's generally under 1 of 2 areas: the balanced scorecard or the levers of control. And interestingly enough, not surprising, most of this research stems out of Harvard, which is sort of the seat of strategy in business schools. The new area, the fifth one, is how management accounting influences creativity and risk-taking. Established research, up until around 2000, really focused on how management accounting affects cognitive and physical effort, and performance is sensitive to that effort. Current research is shifting to be concerned with more of an innovation economy where we need creativity and we need risk-taking, and how does management accounting affect how individuals and work teams are, their creativity, and how they're willing to take risks. So to this point, I've talked a lot about established research before 2000 and some current research from 2000 to 2015. And what I'd like to do now is talk about some changes that have gone on, and maybe some lack of changes that have gone on over time. I'm going to start with a paper that Joan Luft and I wrote, where we summarized all of the management accounting literature into 7 what we call maps. We identified 223 articles that were published, well, the beginning of scientific research in management accounting would be in 1967 up through the year 2001, that were published in 6 top journals. And we'll go through the details later, but right now I just wanted to point out that these are the titles we gave to the 7 maps. So I'm going to take a minute to talk about what do we mean by a map, because that becomes central to understanding the presentation. So here's a map dealing with performance measures and incentives. And it has 2 parts to it. We want to explain incentive compensation, and we want to explain gaming behavior. So the studies over here deal with incentive compensation, and the studies up here deal with gaming behavior. I'm going to focus on, real quickly, on some studies dealing with incentive compensation, just to give you a sense of what the information contained in these maps. So the dependent variable that we're trying to explain here is how much weight is put on a performance measure in executive compensation. How much bonus dollars do you get per unit of performance measure? So here we have non-financial performance measures, and here we have financial performance measures. And we're looking at how much weight is put on it as a function of the organization variables that are proxies for informativeness. These proxies are things like strategy, regulations, etc. So real quickly, here's the independent variables. We have prospector strategy, quality strategy, regulations that are sensitive to non-financial information. So this study is primarily done in the utilities industry, when utilities were responsible by the federal government in the United States for pollution. All of a sudden, CEOs of utilities compensation depended upon how much pollution their company emitted. Noise and accounting measures. So at this point, let me just explain. There's a line here, a simple line like that means that there's an additive relationship. More of a prospector strategy or quality strategy, more weight is put on non-financial measures. It's got one arrow, means causality goes in one direction in this study. There could have been an arrow going the other direction, but it doesn't. This research doesn't do that. Okay, so it's unidirectional. The causality goes one direction. It's at a single level. So up here we have, beyond the organization, things that vary, like between Europe and the United States and Asia, or across industries. We have the organization, variables that vary across organizations. It differs between General Electric and General Motors. Or the subunits within an organization. It differs from marketing to production to R&D, for example. And down here at the individual, it differs across managers. But what we notice here is that there's single level. A multiple level study would have a line that goes from one level to another level. And all this is only one line that crosses from one level to another level. All the other lines are within a level, so they're single level studies. They're linear. All of these are linear. There's a different sort of line designation if they're non-linear, but all these are linear. You'll see later almost everything is linear. They're additive, meaning it's a single line, as opposed to interaction. If it's an interaction, it's a Y shape, meaning this variable and this variable interact to affect this variable. There are very few of these Y shapes. There's one there, there's one there, there's a complicated one there, there's a simple interaction there. But mostly it's additive. Now, of these 30 causal relations, number 1, 2, such down to 30, there's typically only one study for each causal relation. There's a few causal relations here where there's 2 studies, very few where there's 3, none where there's 4. It's a very thin map. Okay, so that's a quick walkthrough of what do we mean by map. And then this recent working paper updates my paper from they mapped studies done on the year 2002 to 2012. There's a lot more studies in this shorter time period, 257. They make some modifications to the map that I thought were pretty good. And they take the maps and they identify what they call submaps. And this then gets really specific about research topics of today. You can see that there's not much going on in budgeting. Information for planning and control. A lot of the first 2 items there, 3 and 4, are about strategy. Strategy is a big theme today. A few studies dealing with change in management accounting. A lot of studies on performance measures and incentives. This is kind of where a lot of the action is. Everybody's interested in money. Interested in if we measure performance, how does that affect the performance of the organization? Subjectivity in performance measurements I talked about earlier. And then we can go down to the bottom here, contracting and control is really concerned with 2 major topics. One is, how does management accounting motivate effort and creativity and performance? And number 20, misrepresentation, which means, how does management accounting motivate people to lie to their boss or not lie to their boss? There are fewer studies that look at how the boss lies to the subordinate. A new area here is looking at motivation and communication honesty in collaborative settings, like in work teams. And the last area in their maps deals with how managers make judgments and decisions. A continuing theme here is when the accounting method changes, we change the cost accounting system, for example, do people appropriately change their decisions, subjective decision models in their head to make a good decision when accounting changes? So we could look at trends. This is sort of by decade, and you can see that over time, budgeting started out with over half of all the studies. Today, there are very few studies on budgeting. That is, we don't really plan and look to the future in our research. It's all about today and yesterday, not about the future. That's really unfortunate in my opinion. Information for planning and control has increased over time. Implementing change in management accounting has increased, but still at a low level. So here's where almost all the action is, the agency theory kind of stuff. Over half the studies today are about performance measures and incentives and how do superiors and subordinates interact when they're dealing with incentives. And then there's fewer research studies today dealing with how individual managers or accountants make decisions and judgments. Okay, so I'd like to turn to my second question is, well, why don't we know more about management accounting from this published research? As I said earlier, when we're at the really big picture level, there's a general agreement about what we know, but it's when we look at the details, that's where things get messy. We start to find conflicts within studies. For example, I predict one thing and my results are something else. Well, do I believe your prediction, or do I believe your results, or do I believe neither? Or we find that results differ across studies. And the question is, why do we have these conflicts when we get down to the real nitty-gritty here and start looking at individual studies or across studies? My basic answer is going to be that we have very simple models of a complex phenomenon. The dictionary defines complex the following way. Complex phenomena have many different parts that are connected or related to each other in complicated ways. So our causal relations in our studies have been very simple. Unidirectional, additive, for example. They're becoming a little more complex. The number of variables that are in studies is increasing. The number of non-additive models is increasing. But many studies still have very simple models. They're linear models, they're additive models, they're unidirectional, and they're single level. And I want to have one slide on each of these to talk about those and what are the consequences for what we don't know about management accounting. Oh, so this puts it more directly in quantitative terms. You can see there's a lot more studies now. This is a 10-year period versus a 30 or 40-year period. A lot more different variables being investigated. Curvilinear, still almost all linear, hardly any nonlinearity considered. Additives, strictly additive models decreased a little bit. Interaction models about the same. Hopefully we'll have more of those. Intervening variable models have increased, but they're really just a series of additive models glued together. So again, we have more complicated additive models. Bidirectional, hardly anything's bidirectional. It's almost always unidirectional. Causality goes one way, but not the other way. The multiple level models, they're all top down, and there are very few of them. So I want to talk about the consequences of these simple models. First, we have a very limited number of management accounting variables in most studies. They have one or two. But in practice, in the real world, we find that there are lots of management that exist simultaneously in a study. And the question then is, are research results biased if important management accounting practices are omitted from a study? And there's a yes and a no answer to this. If the management accounting practices are a system, if they're interdependent, like the parts of the machine that all got to work together to produce an output, if you don't have all the parts of the machine there, then you're not going to get a very good understanding of how the machine would work, because it's not going to work if all the parts aren't there. So if the accounting practices are a system, we need them all there to understand how they work to produce an output. On the other hand, if the practices are independent of each other, then if you exclude one from a study, it makes no difference to your investigation of the practices in your study, because the parts work independently. There's no interdependence. Finally, almost all of the studies today focus on the effects of management accounting, but not on its causes. So we know a lot about the effects, but we don't know, well, why does management accounting exist in the organization? Or when does it exist? We're predominantly focused on the effects of management accounting. Linear models. Almost all of the studies use linear models, but this is not plausible. Linear means that regardless of the level of management accounting, if we add more management accounting, performance is always going to increase at a constant rate. Well, if that were really the case, I think we would find organizations having an infinite amount of management accounting, because if they have more management accounting, performance is higher. But almost all theories predict nonlinear effects. We can look at theories from organizations like contingency theory. We can look at economic theories. We can look at psychology theories. In the big picture, they all predict nonlinearities. But almost all of our predictions in our studies and almost all of our results are linear. And even when there may be nonlinear present in the study, we do everything we can to make it look linear. We exclude really large and really small firms, so we're only dealing with middle-sized firms. We look at raw data and we see it's got a curve to it, so what do? We transform the data to make it linear. We do everything in our research we can to deny nonlinearity when theory tells us we ought to expect nonlinearity. So it would be really helpful going forward if we had more studies that had nonlinear predictions and tested for nonlinear effects. Additive models, there's lots of those in the studies. So additive means, regardless of the situation, the context, if we have more management accounting, performance is always going to increase at the same rate. How much slope, how much of the increase does not depend upon the context. Whether we're in one industry or another industry, high uncertainty, low uncertainty, or whatever, there's always this universal relationship between management accounting and performance. But again, most social science theories predict conditional effects. So when theories predict conditional effects, the implication is we do not need additive models, we need interaction models to account for this conditionality. So we've got a serious problem where a lot of our studies have additive models when in fact the environment they're in would make you believe that there are going to be conditional effects, interaction effects. So let's talk for a second about interaction effects. There are two kinds of interaction effects. Ordinal interactions, and this would be the most common kind of interaction effect in studies. It says that, for example, some management accounting practice, subjective performance evaluation as an example, has a positive effect on performance, but the degree or association depends upon uncertainty. When there's low uncertainty, there's less benefit to subjective performance evaluation. As uncertainty increases, you get more of an effect of subjective performance evaluation on performance. So what that really, though, means is we have an additive model that has two different slopes. In contrast, there are very few studies that have a disordinal interaction. In this case, not only the slope, but the sign of how management accounting affects performance depends on another variable. So here's a study by Chris Chapman used on interactive budgeting, and what he finds is when there's a lot of uncertainty, then more interactive budgeting has a positive effect on performance. But when there's low uncertainty, more interactive budgeting has a negative effect on performance. That's really quite fundamental. And that says there's an optimal level of management accounting. We'd like to get to that point where we reach that optimal amount. Okay, moving on to unidirectional models. Almost all of them are unidirectional, the causal models in these studies. And that basically says, for example, they look at how strategy affects management accounting, or how management accounting affects performance. But they don't look at the reverse causality. So Ken Merchant in the paper a long time ago had this tantalizing notion of, well, does budgeting cause performance? or does performance cause budgeting? Which way does the causal arrow go? Or does it go both directions? In my paper, we looked at what's the causal relationship between budget goal difficulty, how difficult is the budget to achieve, and performance. And what we find is, there's a study, a cross-sectional study at one point in time. It says budget goal difficulty influences performance. But then there's another study at 2 points in time, and it says past performance influences current budget goal difficulty. And then there's another study that has 3 points in time that shows that current performance influences next year's budget goal difficulty, which influences the following year's performance. So which way does the causal arrow go? Well, it seems to depend upon the design of the study, whether you have cross-sectional data or longitudinal data or whatever. And so this is a big distortion in our literature. Causality probably goes in both directions, but the vast majority of study only look at a one-way arrow, not a two-way street. And finally, single-level studies. Almost all the research studies have single-level models. So single-level models don't tell us about how management accounting, when it's implemented across the entire organization, you have one kind of budgeting across the entire organization. How does that differentially affect the various parts of the organization, marketing, production, R&D, for example? And how does it differentially affect the various managers? Because the budgeting is at the organization level, we don't have individual or subunit variables. When we do have cross-level models, they're almost always top-down. It's how the organization-level accounting affects the subunits or the individuals, the accountants or the managers, but we have no knowledge about how individuals, managers, or accountants affect organization-level accounting. So what we need would be helpful here is to have multiple level models. So multiple level, this is a cyclical top-down, bottom-up interaction model. That's a long, really long term. It spells it out exactly, and I'll go through the parts here. We have the higher level, let's say that's the organization. So we have one organization, another organization, and the accounting differs across organizations. And the question is, how does that accounting, budgeting, performance measurement, whatever it is, at the organization level affect individual managers, for example? And the idea here is that if nothing about the manager mattered, then when we have the same budget, all managers would make the same decision, would have the same action. But different managers are going to have different actions, different decisions. And they're going to have, they make different decisions. Here's an interaction now. This thing here, because they have different ability, they have different effort, they have different knowledge, they have different risk preferences. So we need an interaction model of organizational level accounting interacting with individual differences to affect how individual managers respond to the same accounting. So that's a top-down model. Then we would have a bottom-up model, how the individual manager's actions or performance has differential effects on the organization as a function of organizational characteristics. So different managers are in different environmental uncertainties or face different kinds of competition. And so these organizational factors interact with the individual factors to affect how management accounting affects organizational behavior or performance. This then leads me to my third question is, how can we increase our knowledge about management accounting from published research? So this is kind of an anticlimactic slide because I've sort of answered it for you already by showing you what some of the shortcomings of the existing research are. The basic idea here is that we need to match the complexity of the causal relations in our study with the complexity of the management accounting practices. At this point, most of us would say, well, management accounting is really complicated, and it's in a really complicated context of organizations, environment, and all this, but yet we have really simple research models that we use. So we need to increase the complexity of our research models. If management accounting practices are interdependent, they work together to produce an output, then we have to have all of those interdependent parts in the study to understand how any one part produces output. We need curvilinear models so we can understand what's the optimal level of investment in management accounting. We just don't invest more and more and more. No firm has an infinite amount of management accounting, and a linear model would predict that. But they all have a certain amount of investment. So let's see if that's the optimal amount. Where's the point of diminishing returns? Interaction models, accounting is not universal, it's conditional on the situation. And so we need to understand how contingencies and complementarities interact with management accounting practices to affect performance, for example. Bidirectional models, management accounting affects performance, but over the long run, that performance is going to come back and affect the firm and hence affect management accounting. So we need to understand both directions of causality. And finally, we need cross-level models so we can understand how, for example, management accounting at the organization level affects subunits, affects individuals, and how individuals affect subunits and affect organizations. Okay, thank you. That's my presentation. I hope this was understandable and helpful to you. I'll be glad to take any questions or now or later all through the day, or send me an email later. If you want a copy of my slides, I'll be happy to send them to you. You can send me an email. Thank you very much.
Now for questions.
Thank you, Professor Mike, for this thorough presentation. I do have a couple of points that I'd like to see interaction to. First one is, classically, there was a criticism for the management account research as lacking theory, underlying theory, behind especially the behavioral area of management account research. And even with the emergence of the agency theory, which provides a sound basis for the behavior in organizations and tracking, still many implications of the theory are not easily tested because of difficulties of measurement and operational definitions of variables in the theory. On the other hand, there are some contributions of the psychological literature or theories, especially in the area of biases and cognitive biases and heuristics. There's no single unified theory that puts these pieces together. And we look at adjustment, we look at representativeness, and so on. With the exception of framing, maybe, based on the prospect theory, still we work without an underlying basic theory. So I'd like to see, is this still the case today, or are we beyond this? This is one point. Can I complete the point?
I understand your point.
Can I add some points to this? Second point is the real obstacle for the management account research is the lack of databases. We don't have databases, especially in a country like ours. And in this case, archival research is very difficult to do, to have a sufficient sample to test, to do propositions and so on. And in this case, even though I consider myself a positivist, in this case, you are driven to qualitative research, specifically case studies and so on. Third point is,
Can I take it point by point? That would be.
go ahead.
Okay, your first point was lack of theory, or we have micro theories but no coherent overall theory. From where you're from in Minnesota, this would be a very prominent issue. I think today it's still pretty much the same. We have psychology as a field by itself has lots of theories, and so people bring in lots of theories to accounting. Economics has fewer theories, more general theories, so we have an arching kind of situation there. I think behavioral economics is trying to blend that together to provide a more integrative or coherent total. I wish sociology would get more involved here. I think they play a very important role, but the sociologists in accounting have not got involved with this really. And the econ people have not taken very much to sociology, although Greg Waymeyer and a few people kind of have. But to me, theory is really important, and the data is really important. And it's the match, the comparison between the two that makes the coherent total. So that gets to your second point, which is about access to data. I think access to data is always a challenge, but it's not impossibility. So I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine, Ranjini Krishnan, does a lot of management accounting research in the healthcare context. There are databases available that you can have access to. So you can sit in your office here in Cairo or wherever and have the same access to those databases that she does. And you can do management accounting research in the healthcare context. Some countries or cultures are open to survey research and some aren't. I don't know the situation here, but it's good to be a first mover, and so if you can do some survey research, that's great. I historically do a lot of experiments, laboratory type experiments. That's easy to do here as it is in the United States or France or wherever. So I think if we're entrepreneurial and creative, it is clearly possible to get access to data. I know that organizations like IMA and SEMA are helpful in helping researchers get access to data. So I would encourage you to cultivate relationships, for example, with the IMA. And so I think you just have to be a little entrepreneurial and creative, but it's possible. So.
One more point here. Can we talk about the impact of the research, management research, management accounting research on practice? Or this might be the wrong question. If you come from a positivist background, you are experienced. So you could be in practice, from practice, not imposing normal theory on practice. So this whole body of research is more of explaining research, or is it really normative? I don't think it's normative, but it's really positive research.
So in my 40 years in this area, there have been two views. One view would be expressed by Ken Merchant and Bob Kaplan, which is that business out here is very smart, they're very clever. In a practical sense, they figured out what works, passes a cost-benefit test, and they will invent new kinds of ways of doing cost accounting or budgeting or whatever to meet the challenges that they face. And it's our role as academics then, in your terms, to go out and explain, to describe and explain and systematize and that practice that we see emerge in the real world. And we can then ex post use theory to try and interpret, to tell a story about why is practice doing this. Oh, they face certain kinds of competition or uncertainty or regulations, and that drove them to this kind of accounting. And we can find theories from regulation economics or psychology or organizational studies to make sense of the picture that we described. The other view of research is top-down or head-down, pioneered by Joel Dembski, which is very similar in concept though. Firms are very rational, they're optimizing, and economics and mathematics deals with optimization, and therefore we can figure out what an optimizing entity would do, and then we can go out and see in the real world whether firms behave consistent with that. I think both views have some merit. They're both a little bit extreme, that's fine. Most of us are going to be somewhere in between. We're going to use a bit of description, explanation, and we're going to use a bit of prediction from theories. And the two coming together is where the rubber meets the road and we see the value in our research.
Thank you for the interesting appreciation. And I just wondering if you did mention the studies concerning the change in management account and the framework, the framework like institutional and contingency theories approaches concerning management account change. That are, I think, results are not typical. You mentioned that results are different in management account research, especially concerning the practice of management account research. Is that the real world? Does that affect the generalization of the conclusions? If yes, do we have to concentrate on case-based research instead of doing some, a big sample or something? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, in the kind of research that I reviewed here, there's some, but not a great focus on change in management accounting over time. I think the primary reason for that would be that most of this research is cross-sectional. And if you're looking at change over time, you have to have a longitudinal study. There are some studies that are longitudinal, but most are cross-sectional. So they're looking at static, at how management accounting is at this point in time. Another study looks at how management accounting is at that point in time. It's difficult or challenging to make an inference about the change that occurred. I guess I would say it would be wonderful if we had more time dimension to our studies to look at how things change over time. There are some studies going on in Germany right now that I'm aware of where they have, they're looking at 1, 4, 5, and 10-year time changes. And so they've got changes in the organization, changes in performance, and changes in accounting over these different time intervals. So going forward, if we had more temporal dimension to our studies, that would be very beneficial. Generalization. Well, I am a bit extreme on this. My sense is that generalization tends to come from theory. What we can generalize most from our studies is the theory. Theory provides this mental model of how we look at the world, how we organize the world. The data is important, and that's used to refine our theories, update our theories, beliefs about the world, but primarily, if we want to go to Mars or Venus or wherever and look at rocks there, we're going to be using geological theories to understand those rocks there. So theories is a really important lens to look out on the world, but we need data to confirm and revise and improve our theories.
Any more questions? Yes, the mic, please.
you, Professor, for this interesting presentation. A big problem in accounting is that majority of researchers assume a linear relationship between variables. And you said that 99% of management accounting studies use linear models. And this is, in the real world, as you know, is not linear. And in economics, they don't consume or assume linear relationship. I found a recent stream of studies apply accounting mirror networks as understood instead for alternative to linear regression. My question is, can we conclude that the results reached by management accounting studies based on linear models are misleading?
Okay, so the basic thrust, as I understood your question or comment, was if the world is nonlinear and we use linear studies, are we misunderstanding or representing through our research what's going on? So I think the answer is yes and no. If we get smaller and smaller changes, the world becomes more linear. If we have a nonlinear function and we look at little changes on the x-axis, we're going to see it looks linear. So what it means is linear studies are explaining really small things, small changes in the world. But if we want to take the big picture, like capital investment versus operating budgets, big changes, then there's nonlinearities that become important. And if we're going to if our research is going to look at the big picture, we need to capture those nonlinearities. If you don't want to deal with nonlinearities, then look at small changes. But if you want to pop big changes, strategic changes, things like that, then we need to consider discontinuities and nonlinearities. It's not just going to be linear. So the answer is yes and no. It depends what you want to look at, little changes or big changes.
Briefly, sir. Last brief question today for this session, please. Thank you for very much presentation. Actually, I would like to ask a question. What was actually comment? But this is a comment. Now, your study concentrate on Western countries. Now, what do you think if you take part of management accounting research in the MENA country? Do you think that your math and your results little bit will differ, and in which area will differ?
I think that's an important question and one that's obviously timely for this audience. So in a sense what you're asking is, do Western methods or Western theories apply to other settings? To me, that's a big example of conditionalities, contingencies. So there is a lot of research in accounting. I did for about 10 years. It was how management accounting differed in what we call the West, mainly the United States, a little bit of Europe, but how it differed from management accounting in Asia, primarily China and Japan. And we used cross-cultural theories and to try to make predictions about how we would expect management accounting to differ in the West and in the East. I see the same thing could be applied here. If you want to take differences between German accounting and accounting in Arab countries, then look for theories that can explain what are key differences that underlie those two societies, businesses in those societies, regulations, cultural norms, the way firms compete or the way they're organized, and use those theories then to make predictions about how management accounting would differ in the Arab countries and, say, non-Arab countries. My guess is going to be that there's also differences between Arab countries. And so you could use various theories to try and explain why is business different in Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example.
I think we started with what we know about management accounting from published research. That was the big question. And during the presentation, I think we come across so many other questions. And that for me means that we need to do a lot of research in management accounting in order to gain better understanding of what is happening in the practice. Especially the last response from Mike to last question, it opens a lot of other questions and research in the MENA area, North Africa and Asia as well. So there is a lot to do in management accounting research, and that's what I like. Please join me in showing our appreciation for Mike's talk today. Thank you very much, Mike, and looking forward to seeing you here. I'm pleased also to welcome Professor Saeed Daw and Dr. Ashok Sharawi to the stage.
Yeah, I want to invite Dr. Saeed to come because he is the chairman of this conference. And as I said yesterday, if there is any positive outcome from this conference, it goes back to those that had done a great work in preparation and in doing all the academic and scientific things related to the conference. Of course, his name is there. He is the conference chairman, and he has another hat now. This is the problem when you have different hats. He is, he is the former dean of our school, but now he is the vice president of Cairo University. So I don't know whether to introduce you now as the conference chairman or you are going to give a speech as the vice president. No, but I think. Okay, so I'll give the mic to Professor Saeed.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بالنيابه طبعا عن الاستاذ الدكتور جابر نصار رئيس جامعه القاهره والساده النواب، الدكتور عز الدين ابو سليم، الدكتور جمال اسد، وسعيد فوق نواب رئيس الجامعه. انا بشكر قسم المحاسبه جدا على المؤتمر الناجح اللي هم عملوه النهارده. اكيد النجاح ده ما جاش من فراغ، اكيد النجاح ده وراه فريق عمل متكامل. انا بشكركم جدا جدا لنجاح المؤتمر، واعتقد ان النجاح ده باذن الله بيولد نجاحات اخرى. On behalf of Dr. Gabir Nassar, President of Cairo University, and Vice President of Cairo University, Dr. Azadine Abu Said, Vice President for Student Affairs, and Dr. Jamal Asad, Vice President for Postgraduate Students, and me, Vice President for Community Service. We all would like to congratulate our accounting department on preparing this successful international conference in accounting. Of course, this achievement comes as a result of great effort, teamwork, starting from the TA in our Faculty of Commerce, passing through doctors, Dr. Ashok Sharawi, Dr. Ahmed Abu Talib, Dr. Magdi Jamal Abdel Qadir, and at the top of the pyramid, Dr. Hala Al-Kholi. She is my boss. I'm proud because Dr. Hala, she is my boss. I think this conference, or the success of this conference, will lead to more success in the future. Thank you, accounting department, for this great achievement. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in the second international conference in accounting. Thank you very much.
I think we are a little bit late for the second session. Please have to go to close, and then we'll leave the stage to the second.
There are two sessions in parallel now, one here and the other one in Verdi Salon. Thank you.